I will explain the conditions for permission for a permanent residence visa. I work as an immigration lawyer who specializes in applications to the Immigration Bureau. I also receive many inquiries about permanent residence visas. The most frequent inquiry is the question of whether a person can obtain permanent residence. People want to know whether or not they can obtain permission for permanent residence themselves. Perhaps you also want to apply for permanent residence soon if it is possible to obtain it now, or you are a person who cannot yet obtain permanent residence but you want to know how to obtain permanent residence? The question of whether or not it is possible to obtain a permanent residence visa requires correct understanding of the conditions for permission for permanent residence. I will now explain those conditions for permanent residence. If the conditions are cleared, a permanent residence visa can be obtained, and if the conditions are not fulfilled, the result will be that permission is not granted even if an application is made. The requirements for permission are the most important things. First is the first requirement. History of residence. Have you lived in Japan for 10 years? A condition for permission for permanent residence is continuously living in Japan for at least 10 years. It seems that there are people who make an application in their own way after 9 years and a few months, but please be careful because this does not fulfill the criteria for permission and therefore permission will not be granted. It is necessary for at least a full 10 years to have passed at the time the application is made. The period of screening is approximately 6 months. The condition is not that 10 years have passed at the time the result of permission is given, but rather at least a full 10 years at the time the application is made. If it is just a few months, please wait rather than hurry. Another condition is that you have worked for at least 5 years out of those 10 years. A part-time job is no good. You must have obtained a working visa and worked as an employee for at least 5 years. It is okay even if you did not continuously work at the same company. It is okay even if you changed jobs. You can total the number of years at a previous company and your current company. As for the meaning of continuous for 10 continuous years, it will become difficult to be judged as continuous if you leave Japan to go to another country for approximately 180 days in 1 year. Your period of stay in Japan will be temporarily interrupted. If you have a large number of days when you are outside Japan, please check your own passport. Next, if you are a person who is married to a Japanese person or a permanent resident, it will be okay even if you have not lived in Japan for 10 years. For a foreigner who is married to a Japanese person or a permanent resident, it will be okay. If at least 3 years have passed since you got married, and you have lived in Japan for at least 1 year. For a person who is married to a Japanese person or a permanent foreign resident, it is okay even if you have not lived in Japan for 10 years. You will fulfill the condition for permission for permanent residence by being married for 3 years and living in Japan for 1 year. Next is the second requirement. The visa you have now is for at least 3 years. There are valid periods for visas of 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years, but it is necessary to have a visa with a valid period of at least 3 years. A person with a visa with a valid period of 1 year cannot apply for permanent residence. Next is the third requirement. Livelihood requirement. This means, do you have a stable income? Whether you have a lot of savings or a little is rather irrelevant. Income is more important than savings. If your annual income is not at least 3 million yen, the possibility of receiving permission will be quite low. If the applicant alone does not have an income of 3 million yen, it will be okay if the household income is that much. Next is the fourth requirement. Behavior requirement. The behavior requirement involves taxes, pension, health insurance, and criminal record. It is important that you have paid all taxes thus far, so if you have not paid them, please be sure to pay all of them. The main tax is residence tax. If you have not paid it, it will be okay if you pay it. Pension has recently become a point for screening. Previously it was okay even if pension was not paid, and even if all of it was not paid, it was okay if the portion for the past 1 year was paid. However, the Immigration Bureau sometimes requires the portion for the past 3 years. Therefore, if you are asked, it will be necessary to pay the portion for 3 years. In addition, as for health insurance, if you are covered by health insurance through your company, it will not be a problem. If you are not covered by health insurance through your company, I think you are covered by national health insurance, but if you are in arrears for national health insurance, you will not receive permission. The next thing is criminal record, but I think the most common things are traffic violations. If you drive a car, I think you may have committed traffic violations, but if they are minor traffic violations, it will be okay if you only have a few, 3 or 4 times. If you have more than that, I think that it will become disadvantageous. Next is the 5th requirement. You can arrange a personal guarantor. A person who can be a personal guarantor must be a Japanese person or a permanent resident. An ordinary foreigner cannot be a personal guarantor. A person at your company or a friend is okay, so please try to find a person who can be a personal guarantor. If you are married, it is okay to ask your Japanese spouse to be your personal guarantor. Next, I will explain things that are not related to conditions, but for which you must take care. There is some kind of contradiction between materials submitted in the past and the current materials. If there is some kind of contradiction between materials that were submitted at the time of an application for a working visa or a spouse visa in the past and the current application documents for a permanent residence visa, the Immigration Bureau will not know which is true. Therefore, the possibility of not being granted permission for permanent residence will increase. There will be doubts about whether your past application was true in the first place, and it is advisable to think that the officer in charge at the Immigration Bureau will not be kind and ask which information is correct. If you have even a slight contradiction, you must revise the contradiction and then make an application. Take care so that it will not be thought that you will get a divorce soon after obtaining permanent residence. There are actually many people who get divorced soon after obtaining a permanent residence visa. Therefore, if there are elements for which the Immigration Bureau will have doubts and think that this foreigner plans to get divorced after obtaining permanent residence, the possibility that permission will not be granted will increase. Were you able to confirm the conditions for permanent residence?